Harry Kane has 12 months left on his contract, and that means Spurs are faced with a dilemma. Do they sell him now for lots of money, or do they let him go for a free at the end of the season? So how much money are we talking about here? Well, we know that Bayern Munich have made a 70 million euro plus add-ons offer, and since then they have upped that offer, but it doesn't seem to match Spurs' valuation, which again, according to Charlie Eccleshare of The Athletic, is around £100 million plus, which means that Spurs have two options. Either they sell Harry Kane now for a fee between 60 and £100 million, or they keep him for the rest of the season and let him go on a free. So the big question is, how much is a season of Harry Kane worth for Spurs? Now, the biggest argument about keeping Harry Kane is that he makes Spurs more likely to finish in the top four, get them to the Champions League, and therefore get Champions League prize money. So let's break it down step by step, because the first thing we're talking about here is Spurs being more likely to finish in the top four if they have Harry Kane. So if we look at Spurs' Premier League finishes since Harry Kane had his first 30-game plus season, that's 14-15, we can see that there's a general uptick under Pochettino till they get to this second place finish. But since then, in the Premier League, there's been this gradual decline. As you can see, the finishing position has got lower and lower. Now we get to this point here with Antonio Conte, where there's a little bit of a blip. Spurs have Champions League football last season, but again, this season, 8th place finish, and you can see that trajectory is still carrying on. Which isn't me saying that Harry Kane has had a decline, because there's a huge amount of variables that are in play here, not least managers who are hugely influential. And let's face it, with the last few managers, there's a lot that Spurs fans won't want to talk about. But the overall point here is that Harry Kane doesn't guarantee you a top four finish. But taking into account this general decline of the club, the idea that keeping Harry Kane for an extra season will suddenly get them back up into the top four seems a little bit far-fetched. But why is the Champions League so important? Well, because it brings clubs a lot of money. But who knows how much Spurs have earned in prize money from the Champions League since they've had Harry Kane?
It's me! I've worked it all out. So here we can see Spurs' Champions League earnings from the past 9 years, the Harry Kane era, and it's split into prize money, UEFA coefficient, and TV revenue. Now, if you look at the totals over here, you'll be able to see that if you finish in the group stage, you get around 40 million euros. If you finish in around 16, which is where Spurs usually end up, you'll get around 60 million euros. And if you're really lucky and you get to the final with a miracle run and a magical night in Amsterdam, you get around 100 million euros. And then you lose to Liverpool. So overall, in the Harry Kane era, Spurs have earned 342 million euros in 9 years. Now, if you average that out, that's around 38 million euros per season in Champions League earnings with Harry Kane. Now, that's 30 million pounds a year. That's a pretty good chunk of money. But that means that if you were to turn down 90 million pounds for Harry Kane right now, on average, you would need 3 years to get that value back in Champions League earnings. Now, if we only count the years where Spurs were actually in the Champions League, they earned around 68 million euros per season. That's around 60 million pounds. So even in one of the best case scenarios where Spurs are able to keep Kane for an extra year, that loss of 60 to 100 million means that they would need to seriously overachieve compared to their previous average Champions League performances just to break even. So from a financial point of view, you can just about argue that keeping Kane would be worth it. But that's only if the best case scenario happens on the pitch. And that brings us to another argument for why Spurs fans think that they should keep Harry Kane. And that's obviously that Harry Kane makes Spurs a better football team, better than any other footballer could. And to break that down, let's go back to Jon.
Well, let's talk about how Ange Postecoglou teams play football. Now, Ange Postecoglou is a possession coach. He wants his team to hold the ball, move it down the field, and generate goals. And the way that he wants to do that is by building up, particularly in the wide areas. So you're going to see lots of wide progression from an Ange Postecoglou team. Now, in the deep build-up phase, what you'll see from a Postecoglou team is this: fullbacks inverting. Why might they do that? Well, it makes it much easier to possess the ball in order to be able to move through the first few phases of the opposition's pressure. But it also does a couple of other things. One of the things is it gives you a little bit more cover for your centre midfielders, which means they can get a little bit more progressive. So you can push forward and be really aggressive in the attacking phase. The other thing that it does is it opens up these lines into the wide players. So again, that's going to help you with wide ball progression as well. Once you've got the ball up the field, it's all about these wide overloads. So these triangles in particular become super important in the wide areas. So you have the fullback, the wide player, and the central midfielder on either side. And the idea here is that you overload the ball against the opposition, you can retain possession of the ball, and then you can work it into these dangerous areas in the wide spaces of the final third. And there's a certain amount of flexibility here. So for example, if the right winger has the ball here, the right back can make the run into the channel to receive the ball. Equally, the central midfielder could make that run, and then the right back could fill in that space as well. And what you end up with is the retention of this triangular shape further down the pitch, so you're still able to control the ball in these areas. So the big idea here is that you want to get the ball into dangerous scoring positions. That means into this area in the penalty box where you're more likely to score. What is the job of the centre forward in this system? Well, their primary role is to get into these dangerous areas and score. So when you watch Postecoglou team play, what you should look out for is the centre forward pinning the centre backs. They're going to sit in between the centre backs here. They're going to do two things. One is to get into these dangerous areas, sit on the shoulder of the last man, so that in these instances where the ball is in the wide area, the wide player can play the ball to the striker and they can finish them off. But the other thing that pinning does is that it creates space for teammates around you. So when the centre forward is going for this ball, the two centre backs will be going with them, and this opens up a nice space here where your 8 can get into, and then they can generate these dangerous chances as well in behind the centre forward. But the whole point of this is that the system generates chances, and the centre forward's job is to be in a position to finish those chances. You want the centre forward to be around the goal, putting the ball into the net. So I've got an example of this from a recent Old Firm game. Celtic are playing this way down the field, but this is a moment of transition. So you can see Kyogo here, the striker, dropping back in to help his team defend. But the ball is going to be won by Greg Taylor, who's going to play it immediately to Callum McGregor, who's going to get his head up, look down the field, and as you can see, Kyogo is already responding to this by looking for the space between the two centre-backs here. So as soon as Celtic have the ball facing down the field, we can see Kyogo ready to make that run in behind. Now the ball doesn't go immediately in behind because Callum McGregor plays the ball to Alistair Johnson, the right back here, who again is going to turn towards the Rangers goal, and as soon as that movement is made, again we see Kyogo here making that run in between the two centre-backs into the space. Johnston plays the ball into Kyogo, who's able to take it down and generate a really big chance. He actually scores from this, but it is offside. And this is something you see a lot from Ange Postecoglou strikers because they're always playing off the shoulder, and it's a gamble that they're willing to take. Sometimes you'll be offside, sometimes you'll get a great goal. Here's another example from the Scottish FA Cup final. This time Celtic are playing this way, and as we can see, it's a situation where Celtic have the ball in the final third in the wide area. Here's Kyogo, he's in the central space, he's up against the centre-back. He's actually walking quite slowly at this point, but what he's going to do is have a real burst of pace because he recognises that the wide player is going to get in behind and play the ball back. So as we can see, once the wide player gets the ball around, you can see Kyogo already making that run into the space here, and actually has a really nice finish, and that's the opening goal of the final. So what we're seeing is examples of the centre forward just getting into those dangerous spaces which the system is designed to get the ball into so they can then score. What might this system look like with Harry Kane in it? Well, we have a good example of what it might look like because Spurs have recently played against West Ham in a pre-season friendly. This is a few clips from the first half where Harry Kane played as a 9, and one of the things you'll notice is that Kane is not getting into those dangerous areas. So here Spurs are playing this way down the field. This is the fullback, going to play the ball to Kane on the halfway line. Kane is going to receive it and then play the ball into Skip, but the move does break down. Now I want you to notice the timestamp here, so 1:07 on the clock. The move has broken down, Spurs are able to win it back, they generate a chance, that breaks down, and then they win it back in the wide area. And then in the 13 seconds that have passed since then, we're only just seeing Harry Kane getting into the penalty box in order to be in that dangerous position. Until then, his teammates have had to do that. And that's not how Ange Postecoglou wants his centre forwards to play, which isn't to say that centre forwards can't be involved in the build-up play, but the problem that this 45 minutes of football showed up was that Harry Kane was doing all of the build-up stuff and not enough of getting into the dangerous scoring area stuff. So I've got a few more examples, and these are all from the first 10 minutes of the game. There's plenty more examples I could have shown you. So here we've got Kane playing where you might want your number 8 to be, and actually the two 8s are now ahead of him. And most importantly, we can see there's no one pinning those centre-backs. No one is making those centre-backs work hard by looking for space in behind, moving them deeper and generating even more space for teammates here. This is a minute later. You can see Spurs are progressing the ball down the field in the wide areas. Here's your wide triangle. Spurs are going to try and get the ball in the final third in the wide situation. And again, this is where you want your striker to be, and Harry Kane is miles off the pace. Here's another example of Spurs building up in a wide area, and Harry Kane has dropped into the fullback area on the other side. And again, no one in this space where you want the striker to be causing problems for the back line. So Spurs go in 2-0 down at half-time. Postecoglou changes up the whole team, and Richarlison comes on as a number 9. Now, Richarlison is not as good a player as Harry Kane, but he comes on and immediately changes the game because he starts adopting these kinds of positions. So within a minute of coming on, we see here Spurs are now playing the other way. Højbjerg has the ball. This is Richarlison. He's already looking to find the space in behind the centre-backs. Højbjerg is actually able to play a delicious through ball, and Richarlison is in behind, and he's generated all this space now that Perisic can attack, so that when Richarlison gets the ball in this area, he can play the ball back across, and this generates what we call in the industry a good chance, which somehow Perisic misses. But the point is that Richarlison is now adopting those spaces that are really dangerous for a Postecoglou striker. Here's another example from a few minutes later. Now we have the centre-back in a load of space, but here's Richarlison between the two West Ham centre-backs, pinning them. You can see that he's dragging them. Their position is dependent on where he is. And there's a couple of things to notice here. Again, notice how Richarlison is a step ahead of the centre-backs, technically in an offside position, the same way we saw from Kyogo. But the reason why he's doing that is because it pulls the centre-back line deeper, and that generates a huge amount of space now between the lines, so the 8s can operate in there. And here's another really nice example, because Spurs have just won the ball back in a defensive transition. Giovanni Lo Celso comes out with the ball, and again you can see immediately Richarlison is ready between the two centre-backs, looking for the run in behind, and again you can see just a step ahead of that line, generating all of this space behind him for his teammates to operate within. And unsurprisingly, Spurs looked much more threatening in the second half, and that is because Richarlison was operating in those areas where Postecoglou wants his centre-forwards to operate. And again, this isn't because Richarlison is any better than Kane, it's that Richarlison has a profile which much better suits the Postecoglou system. So let's get back to the question, should Spurs sell or should Spurs keep Harry Kane? We've seen that from a financial point of view, Spurs aren't going to make as much money keeping Harry Kane as they will from selling him. They've just brought in a new manager who plays a very different style of football to the old manager, and there's lots of holes in their squad. So 80 to 100 million pounds right now would be pretty useful. And then on the field, we've seen that the issue with strikers is not one of quality, but of profile fit. Harry Kane is probably the best number 9 in the world, but he's a very different profile from what Postecoglou wants, which means that Spurs could probably bring in a replacement for Kane much cheaper. All of which suggests that it's a no-brainer. Spurs should sell Harry Kane now. But there is one convincing argument for Spurs fans to use that the club should keep Harry Kane, and that is that he's one of your own. Every football fan wants the chance of seeing the best players in the world playing at their club, and off the basis of that, it's entirely right for Spurs fans to want to keep Harry Kane. But that's entirely the attitude that has got Spurs where they are now. There's no room for romance in football anymore. Football has become about business, it's become about money, it's become about maximising your utility. And so in the cold light of day, the best option for Spurs is to try and get as much money for Harry Kane as they can right now.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.